Okay, welcome to lecture number 102 on Mor Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed. We are studying the page numbers all refer to this book in Shlomo Pine's version of the Guide for the Perplexed. We are currently in part 3, chapter 17. We are on page 471. Now, as we learn through the next several chapters, or talking about the next really probably 2 months or so together, a lot of these ideas build. I mean, the whole book, everything builds on what we've studied before. So, but when he discusses the issue of providence, it's important to remember that is the background noise from my AC system really loud? No, it's not so bad. Okay, fine. So the discussion of providence is particularly important to take it in step by step, because the Rambam really builds his argument. So I just want to remind everyone of what he said so far in chapter 17. He laid out 5 approaches to the idea of providence. Now, providence is a concept which really encompasses, really 3 things, right? It encompasses God's knowledge of what's going on, right? He has to be paying attention, right? It encompasses his control of what's happening in this world. Like if he's paying attention in Rambam's philosophy, that's more or less synonymous with also controlling it. If God knows that something is happening, it's also God making something happen, right? And providence is also is therefore intertwined closely with the idea of justice, right? If God is the one knowing it and doing it, then it should reflect, some form of justice, or at least we want it to. We hope it does, right? So, and the way these 3 issues intertwine are how the different ways he's going to deal with he is dealing with this concept of providence. Now, given all of that which we said, and Rambam pointed out the big question of theodicy makes the question confusing. If God has providence, why don't we see the kind of justice that we would expect to see? We would expect to see everyone who's good get rewarded, everyone who's bad get punished, and everything would go along hunky-dory. The world would make sense, right? And everything would be fine. But that's not what we see. So because that's not what we see, everyone has a different idea of providence, and each one has its problems. So the first one was the Rambam mentioned was the idea of Epicurus, right? Who said there's no such thing as providence. That the God, if there is a God, he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't care what's going on. He has nothing to do with what's going on, if he even exists. All right. Well, so then you negated all the problems, and Rambam pointed out the philosophical problems with Epicurus's argument. The second approach was that of Aristotle, and Aristotle felt that there is providence, but there's only pure providence for things that are permanent and real, like the spheres above the moon, the spheres that we see rotate around, the ones within which the stars and the planets exist. There's pure providence, because the intelligences which emanate from God himself through the emanations, which Rambam explained in different places, make all those movements happen, and they're permanent. They always go that way. That's the way they're always going to be. And beneath the final sphere, beneath the sphere of the moon, which means the world, planet Earth, the place where you and I live, right? That in Aristotle's theology, there's philosophy, there's only general providence for species. There's general providence that basically God watches the world and makes sure that lions have what lions need to be lions, and that lions can propagate, and one lion eventually dies and has children, and there's new lions, and so on and so forth. And the same thing for human beings. It's important to point that out. Aristotle felt that human beings were exactly the same as all the other species, right? God set up human beings in such a way that the human species exists and goes about doing human things, and so on and so forth, and so on for every other species. But there's no specific providence. In other words, God doesn't do or care or say anything about me, Saul Weinreb's life. He couldn't, he doesn't care, he doesn't watch, he doesn't know, but he makes sure that, that the human species can produce a guy like me, and then a guy like me will be born, do my thing, and eventually pass away, and maybe have children, and so on. And that's that. So that's number 2. The Rambam accepted Aristotle from a philosophical perspective, and I keep that point in mind. In other words, his argument with Aristotle was only Torah based, right? In other words, it made sense to him, right? It's fine, but it just doesn't jive with what we believe in the Torah, right? And remember, the whole point of this guide for the perplexed is to take what Rambam saw as philosophical truth and make it jive, make it work with what the Torah teaches. So that causes a perplexion, which Rambam is going to fuse for us. Hopefully, he's going to begin that process tonight. Number 3 were those people that give providence to everything. The Rambam associated that with the Asherites, which is some movement within an early Islam. And what these people believed, at least according to the Rambam, was that the providence is over everything. There isn't a single thing that happens in the world, right? Even the smallest, whether the gnat decides to fly this way instead of that way, whether the grass grows this way or that way, which leaf falls in the storm, everything is providence. Everything, and Rambam pointed out the difficulty with that, which is mostly the difficulty of free will, of choice, so on and so forth. But he pointed out absurdities with that from the Torah perspective and from philosophical perspective. And then there was number 4, which was there is free will and there's pure justice, right? God only punishes people that deserve it, and he only rewards people that deserve it. The problem with this one is what they do with the questions of theodicy. If that's the case, then how could a baby who never did anything wrong be born with an illness, with a congenital illness? It doesn't make any sense. Or anytime we see an innocent person suffering, or we see a despicable person, winning the lottery or whatever, right? We see these things happen. So they deal with it by trying to explain it away, by saying, well, maybe, there's reward later on in a different world. Maybe there's this, maybe there's that. All kinds of explanations. Somehow it's just, right? Rambam described the issues with that, right? But there is justice, but it's just we don't see it. But there's justice for everything. Everything is just, right? And then the Rambam described, and this is what we did at the end of last week, or last time we studied together, was what he described as the Torah view. And the Torah view really has 3 main points that he pointed out, and a 4th little addendum. So the main point is, number 1, free will is an absolute, right? For human beings, at least. And Rambam does point out that everything that acts in this world acts because of their will, right? Animals decide to do things too. The Rambam explicitly said that. But free will, the ability to make a choice between doing good or bad, only humans have that ability. But the Torah, he brings from the Torah, it's clear that that has to be true. No matter what you're going to try to answer, free will must be upheld. Number 2, he said that God is just. And he quoted all sorts of verses that show that God is just. Whatever he's doing, whatever decisions he makes, right, is just. And the third thing, but we're ignorant of what exactly justice is, right? In Rambam's last sentence, it was one tiny little sentence, but we are ignorant of the various modes of deserts. Of who deserves what, we don't know. And those are the 3 primary points of what the Rambam says we can glean directly from the Torah. If you study the Torah, you get these 3 points. And then he said, some other people add other things, like the Chazal talk about the concept of Yisurin Shel Ava, sufferings of love, which are designed to increase your reward. God might make your life difficult, not because you deserve it, but because he wants you to get an even bigger reward in the world to come, or whatever. He may have other reasons. And that's kind of a beginning of an attempt to answer that question of what's God's justice, right? It's a small piece of the puzzle, how Chazal begin to attempt to say, when we say, well, we don't know how God decides what we deserve. Well, sometimes we might deserve something that seems like a punishment to us, but may not actually be a punishment. It may be some sort of a trial or a test to enable us to grow from, or something like that, right? So there must be some other purpose, enable us to achieve something even greater, because by overcoming adversity, we become an even greater person, and we're able to accomplish more and eventually achieve and then eventually gain more, whatever it is that we're gaining. But that was how the Rambam ended his discussion of the Torah opinion. However, he then, and we're about to start in 471. The Rambam understands his explanation is not really a number 6, and I'm going to show it to you in a few ways. But the Rambam understands his way of explaining providence as an explanation of the Torah's explanation, right? So, in other words, they're trying to make, and in his own, in the way that Rambam always does, is trying to make something that makes philosophical sense. So it's going to be very similar to Aristotle, right? Because in Rambam's mind, Aristotle, the way Rambam understood Aristotle, remember the Aristotelian scholars had all kinds of ways of understanding him, and Rambam had his way, but that represented the height of philosophical and scientific truth at the time of the Rambam, at least. So he's going to try to make that work. So make number 2 fit with number 5, right? So, but it's going to be in an interesting way. But let's read it. So, as for my own belief, that's where I'm up to on page 471. So, as for my own belief, Rambam says, with regard to this fundamental principle, I mean divine providence, it is as I shall set it forth to you. In this belief that I shall set forth, I am not relying, listen to the sentence carefully, I am not relying upon the conclusion to which demonstration has led me. In other words, I'm not, demonstration in Rambam's language is what you and I would call today a scientifically demonstrated proof through an experiment and like scientific proof, right? That's what the Rambam says. In other words, I'm not saying this because it's been demonstrated to be true, right? But upon what has clearly appeared as the intention of the book of God and of the books of our prophets. So the Rambam is what he's basically saying here, in other words, is I'm fine with Aristotle. That would make sense to me. If I didn't have the Torah and I wasn't a Jew, I'd go around and I'd be totally cool with Aristotle's way of understanding it, right? That human beings are like every other species and there's no such thing as providence for humans. But because I learned the Torah and because I believe in the Torah, right, and the Torah says otherwise, I therefore have come up with a different understanding. So he's explicitly telling us that this is his attempt at achieving the point and purpose of this entire book, right? To make the two work together. I have the Torah, it teaches me something. I have Aristotle, which I know to be true, Rambam is thinking. So this opinion, which I believe is less disgraceful than the preceding opinions and nearer than they to intellectual reasoning. This is beautiful sentence here, because what Rambam is again stating is the reason why I like my opinion, right, is because I can take what I saw in the Torah, learn and understand it, and it makes sense philosophically too. Yay. That's the point of the Moreh Nevuchim, right? In other words, I don't have to learn the Torah and then say and reject the philosophy of the science, and I don't have to learn the science and reject the Torah. I can learn them both, teach them both, fuse them, and come up with something coherent that makes sense, that both makes sense and conforms to what the Torah teaches. This is the goal of this book. For I, for one, believe that in this lowly world, I mean that which is beneath the sphere of the moon. Okay, so remember, Rambam said, Aristotle, I'm totally cool. Everyone, science agrees that above the sphere of the moon, it's all God, right? Right? It's all providence. Because, right, however, beneath the sphere of the moon, divine providence watches only over the individuals belonging to the human species, and that in this species alone, all the circumstances of the individuals and the good and evil that befall them are consequent upon the deserts, just as it says, for all his ways are judgment. So let that sink in for a minute. We're going to be discussing this for the next many lectures, and he's going to be expounding on this idea. But what he just stated was that I agree with Aristotle about above the sphere of the moon. I even agree with Aristotle below the sphere of the moon, that the only providence that exists on this world is the providence for the species, right? In other words, God makes sure that that lions have what lions need and cows have what cows need, and so on and so forth. But in terms of providence, in terms of watching over the individual acts of individuals, right, and making sure and running the world in such a way that what people get what they deserve, their deserts, as we just said, that only applies to human beings. Okay, But regarding all the other animals and all the more, the plants and other things, my opinion is that of Aristotle. So in case you think I'm just giving you a spiel about the Rambam makes it very, very clear that I agree with Aristotle on everything else, right? However, the place where I differ from Aristotle, says Rambam, is over God's providence over human beings. Because there, as the Rambam is going to explain to us in detail, God does care about each individual, what he or she does, the decisions that we make, and makes sure that what we get is justice. Now, having laid that down, for I do not by any means believe that this particular leaf has fallen because of a providence watching over it. Now, I don't know about you, but having been in the Orthodox world for a long time, I have heard many lectures, right, from many rabbis that say something else, right? Saying, no, God watches over every blade of grass. There's an angel watching over Rambam. That's fine if you want to take that approach, but I want to make it clear that Rambam is blazing a different path here. He's not taking the path that you may find in other Jewish works, right? He's blazing a different path. And nor that this spider has devoured this fly, because God has now decreed and willed something concerning individuals, right? God didn't say that spider number 7,664 in Pakistan is going to eat fly number 8,612,000. That's not how God doesn't do that, right? God made spiders, and spiders do spider things. God made flies, flies do fly things. He made sure that spiders have what spiders need and flies have what flies need. And what this spider ate a fly, finished, right? Nor that spittle spat by Zaid has moved till it came down in one particular place when he spat, and it landed on this specific gnat and killed it by a divine decree and judgment. Nor that when this fish snatched by this worm from the face of the water, this happened in virtue of a divine volition concerning individuals. That's not how it works. God made fish, God made worms. They do their thing. For all in this is my opinion due to pure chance, just as Aristotle holds. Now, when he says pure chance here, he doesn't mean it's pure chance, because it's not really pure chance. Remember, the creator of it all and the one who makes it all happen this way is God himself, right? God created the world, right? And God, for all this, in my opinion, it's due to chance. According to me, as I consider the matter, and here's the key, that's the most important thing that he's been telling us, is that divine providence is consequent upon the divine overflow. Now, as he introduces this concept to us, I want to go back and explain the cognitive model according to Rambam. And we've been through this several times, but it's important to remind ourselves what it is here. So the cognitive model I've been calling it, that's my term, the cognitive model of Rambam. But the idea is that we have two consciousnesses. One is the imaginative faculty, right? And that is the part of our brain that interacts with the world around us. It receives input from all of the senses, and it makes images, and that's the part of our brain that has desires, that has wants, and reacts. A person can live 99% of his life in that imaginative faculty. I see this, I want it, I grab it, I eat it. I see that, I want it, and go through life that way. But then there's what Rambam said is the rational faculty. According to the rational faculty is acted upon by what he called the active intellect. That's the faculty in our brain which thinks about things and decides what's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, right? And the Rambam said, he said a prophet is someone who has so developed his rational faculty that he's capable of controlling the imaginative faculty, so that the things that he wants are the same things as the things that are right, right? Now, the active intellect is the conduit through which the emanations come from above, from God. So God is the intelligence par excellence, right? The intelligence which we can't understand, we can't fathom, we can't speak, we can't describe, but that intelligence through the emanations goes down through one sphere to the next sphere to the next sphere, all the way until it reaches human beings. So in essence, when we are exercising that active intellect, and this is the key point here, we are actually exercising, and this is sounds very Kabbalistic, and you'll see sometimes the very, very ultra rationalist Rambam says concepts which somehow almost drive us into the mystical. And that is that, but it's important to remember that Rambam understood the active intellect as a physiological concept, right? This was Aristotelian physics. It's intellect which makes movement happen, which makes things happen in Aristotelian physics. So the point there is that the active intellect is really God, is really coming straight from God, right? When we make those decisions, we are getting close to God. We're identifying with him. We are enacting the kind of life that he wants us to live and the kinds of decisions that he wants us to make. That's how when an active intellect makes a decision, that's almost the godliness within us that's making that decision. So it's through this that providence occurs, right? It's through that active intellect, that through that rationalist, the rational part of our mind, the one that we control, the one that we use to make choices, and the one that if we live our lives properly, we train to control our imaginative faculties. That is the conduit through which providence works. So now it becomes obvious, and the species, and I'm turning the page, with which this intellectual overflow is united, right? So that it has become endowed with intellect. And so that everything that is disclosed to a being endowed with intellect was disclosed to it, right? It's only the human being that has this quality, is the one accompanied by divine providence. It's this human being that has this intellect, which has divine providence. Because when what does it mean when we say that God knows through that? That's how we connect to divine providence. That's how we connect to the knowledge of God, and we're almost acting as God himself in some ways, right? And that sounds very blasphemous, but I said almost. I put another 10 qualifiers in there, right? When we use that intellect to live our lives and make the decisions. The key thing here is decisions. I'm saying that because it's based on the first principle the Rambam laid out, which is free choice, right? So from the point of view of which appraises all its actions from the point of view of reward and punishment. So then that intellect is thinking of reward and punishment. But think for a moment, and we're going to get to this concept in later lectures, not today, in much more detail. But what does reward and punishment mean then? If the active intellect is the connection we have to providence, reward and punishment isn't really occurring in the realm of the imaginative faculty and the physical world that we see around us. The realm of reward and punishment has just transferred to the back part of our brain where we're getting those emanations from God, right? Reward and punishment is now closeness to God versus distance from God, right? Reward and punishment means something completely different. So you're getting a smell, a scent here of the beginning of Rambam's answer to the question of theodicy, right? The world, the plane on which reward and punishment happens is not the plane on which you and I are usually functioning. Most of us are usually functioning, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, whatever physical attractions we have and wants and desires and needs. I need money, I need this, I need that. All the things, that's the plane that most of us exist on. But if we've fully trained our active intellect, that we were in full control and we spent our time concentrating on these kinds of concepts and living our lives this way, reward and punishment is now occurring on a different, so justice is happening, but it's happening somewhere else. Now, if, as he states, so now it's going to bring it a little bit down to earth, okay? So now think about it for a moment from Aristotle's point of view, right? So in Aristotle's point of view, he looks at human beings, right, as pure. What happens to us is we're just as the animals, right? Whether or not this spider eats that fly, it happens. This is the way it goes, right? Why not the other fly? I don't know. What happens? Chance, right? So he would say the same thing by human beings. So God forbid if someone goes out in a ship, and unfortunately, this is relevant. I mean, as we speak now, people in Florida are getting hit by a hurricane. If a ship gets lost at sea or a roof collapses in a calamity, right, and the people inside get killed, right, it's complete chance, total chance, right? So if, as he states, the foundering of a ship and the drowning of those who are in it and the falling down of a roof upon those who are in the house are due to pure chance, right, that might be true, right? That it's chance that dictates the storm. Chance, in other words, the laws of nature that makes a storm happen. But who decided to be on that boat, right? Who decided to go into that house? Who decided to build that house? Who decided that when I build this house, I'm going to make a bad a bad foundation because it's cheaper and faster, and then it falls apart in 5 years, right? Who decided to not follow the building codes when I built the house? Who decided to take the boat into the ocean when the weather forecaster said there might be a hurricane, right? Who decided to go on the boat at all, which is a treacherous thing to do, in order to make money by bringing, goods or merchandise somewhere else? All of those things were not chance. Those were products of our decisions, right? So in a sense, it sounds almost like the Rambam. And let me read his sentence because I want to read his words first, and I'm going to expound a little. So it's true that by him are due to pure chance, but the fact that the people in the ship went on board and that the people in the house were sitting in it is, according to our opinion, not due to chance, but to divine will, right? So here he's saying that how is that divine will exercised? By free choice. When you decided, right, that you were going to go on this trip, and when they told you there's going to be a hurricane, you said, hurricane, schmurricane, right? You were making the decision to put yourself in harm's way, right? A person who is guided by true divine providence wouldn't make such a decision. So all of a sudden, the divine providence is being exercised by our free will, right? And divine providence, the closer we connect ourselves to God, the less likely it is that we're going to choose a path that's going to bring to suffering. The divine will, according to the deserts of those people, are determined in his judgments, the rule of which cannot be attained by our intellect. Ultimately, though, he gives the qualifier, right? So we're starting to get closer and closer to understanding, but ultimately we still don't understand. Because last week there was another guy who also went out on a boat, right? And he was also smart. Well, I don't know, maybe he was smart, maybe he wasn't. And they also said there might be a hurricane, and his ship didn't go down in a hurricane, right? So there's still questions. There's still things that we don't understand, but we're starting to portray a picture here of how providence is connected to our intellect and how the decisions we make are the way divine providence plays out, right? I was impelled. I promise there's going to be a lot more discussion about this. He's just laying down the idea. We have to start thinking about the way God provides, the way God watches and knows us as individuals. And we have to think of it in Maimonidean terms of going through the active intellect, right? Which is how God communicates with our rational part of our brain, and how we can hopefully use that rational part of our brain to control the way we live our lives. So now, remember, Rambam said, let's go back a drop. He said, I got this from the Torah. So where did I see this in the Torah? I was impelled to adopt this belief. I'm starting the second paragraph on page 472 now. By the fact that I never found in the book of a prophet a text mentioning that God has a providence watching over one of the animal individuals, but only over human individual. So that knocks out those people who say that God has providence over everything, right? That was the Asherites, right? I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but whatever. Anyway, the only time the Torah talks about providence, in other words, God watching over and God caring about and God, making things happen in our lives, is only, right, over humans, not animals. The prophets are even sometimes astonished that providence watches over human individuals. The prophets often express the idea that why in the world, in other words, and Rambam is saying this because he's thinking the prophets know the Aristotelian idea too, right? In other words, they know that humans are just animals like, or seem to be animals like every other species. So why in the world should God care about us? He doesn't care about every individual lion, so why should he care about every individual human? And the prophets are astonished that he does care, and they express that through many things. So thus it says, what is man? What is man that you should know about him? Or what is a human being that you should even think about or mention him? Right? What is man that thou art mindful of him? And so on. There's sayings all over Tanakh where the prophets express this idea that even humans, it's amazing that there's providence, right? So in other words, the Rambam is establishing that it shouldn't come to you as a surprise at all if I tell you that he has no providence over animals, because the prophets were astonished that he even has it over humans. But the assumed thing is that he wouldn't have over animals, right? Now, I know you might be thinking in the back of your head, am I telling you that God doesn't know that spider ate the fly in Pakistan? Well, how could I say that God doesn't know? I promise he's going to deal with that, but I doubt we're going to get to there today. All right. But he's building his case. It takes time to build his case. All right. So Sometimes, however, there are clear texts concerning providence watching over all the human individuals and exercising a surveillance over all their actions. Thus, he that fashioneth the hearts of them all, that considereth all their works. For thine eyes are upon all the ways of the sons of man, to give everyone according to his ways. For his eyes are upon the ways of man, and he seeth all his goings. Where these are, you can read in the book they give the things. I'm reading it in the English. But the Torah, too, sometimes makes explicit statements concerning providence watching over human individuals. Thus it says, nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. Whosoever has sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. So on and so forth. The idea of providence is replete throughout the Torah, throughout the prophets. Such statements occur frequently. You can look through the Torah and you'll see it. And it's the thrust of the whole Torah, pretty much. The idea that if we do good, God is watching us. He knows we do good, and he'll reward us for it. If we do bad, God is watching us. He knows we're doing bad, and he'll punish us for it. It doesn't take too much Torah knowledge to know that that's the thrust of the Torah. So all the stories concerning Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are proof of there being individual providence. Those stories were told about individuals. Avraham Avinu, God rewarded him, God punished, God this, God, Yaakov, this, that, back and forth. All those stories are all stories about providence, right? So the fact that there's providence over humans, right, is something that's clear from the Torah, right? However, I would have thought, and the prophets themselves would have thought like Aristotle, had not the Torah taught us this idea. Right, that's important to remember. Now, then he says, as for the other individuals of animals, the position with regard to them is indubitably as Aristotle sees it. Everything else, I agree with Aristotle, except for regarding human beings. For this reason, killing them and employing them usefully as we wish has been permitted and even enjoined. There are cases where sometimes we can kill an animal because it is not a human being. There's almost never, with some notable exceptions, a reason to kill a human being, but an animal, there you can, because they don't have individual providence. Now, hold that thought for a second. A proof that there is no providence watching over the animals other than this man, except the kind of providence mentioned by Aristotle, may be found in the dictum of the prophet. And he's reading from Habakkuk here. For the prophet says, and I'll read it in the Hebrew. It's in Habakkuk, the first chapter, 14 and 15, and he's talking about the Nebuchadnezzar and how he was a tyrant of a king, and how he killed off people and as if they were animals. And the verses read, Vatasa Adam Hayam, you treated human beings as if they were just fish of the sea, Keremes lo moshabo, as if they were worms or crawly bugs over whom no one rules. In other words, you treated them like animals. Kula and so on. He trapped them all with a hook, like you trap fish. You go reu bechermo. He put them in his net, and he gathered them in his net, and so on. And he's rejoicing over it. He's portraying Nebuchadnezzar as the tyrant who gathers human beings together in a net and in battle and slaughters them like a person slaughters fish, right? However, the prophet then explains that it's not so, that what happened was due to neglect and withdrawal of providence. It's not because that what happened to the human beings was not because they were animals, but it was because of their sins, and it was a punishment, and they got what they deserved. For he says in the end, "O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment," and so on. Now, so there's no providence for animals, but there is for human beings. However, lest you think for a minute that Rambam thinks it's justifiable to go kill animals, he's going to make it very clear that nothing is further from the truth. Do not think that this opinion, this is the second chapter on 473, may be refuted in opposition to me by means of the dicta. It says he gives the beast his food, God gives the animals food, and he brings a whole bunch of verses. You will find many such texts, but nothing in them that disproves this opinion, because these texts are referring to providence watching over the species. It is true, right, that God has providence over the species of animals, right? In other words, he makes sure that the world runs in such a way that deer have grass to eat and lions have deer to eat and so on and so forth, right? It is as if they described his bounty may be exalted, for which prepares for every species the food necessary for it and the matter for its subsistence. Its food and whatever it needs, the climate it needs, the trees it needs, the ground it needs, whatever it needs to live, it has. This is clear and manifest. Aristotle likewise holds that this kind of providence is necessary and exists, right? In other words, scientifically, they agree that this providence is true. Alexander mentions this concerning Aristotle, namely the preparation of the existence of food required by every species for its individuals. Were it not for this, the species would perish. Okay, this is clear upon the slightest consideration. But now the Rambam says, as for their dictum, right, that Tsar Balechayim is Minatorah, that one is not allowed to cause unnecessary suffering to animals, right? Right. So don't think that I'm giving you a license to cause animal suffering. And here it's interesting, because one could think, why does the Torah, if the animals don't have providence and humans do, why does the Torah? You might think that okay, so then I could just go kill animals, right? But the Torah makes it clear that you can't, right? We can't make animals suffer, and so why not? So some suggest, well, because philosophically I just justified it to you, right? So you might think, well, the Torah doesn't want you to learn bad character traits, right? Or you can say that it's inherently a problem. You shouldn't cause unnecessary suffering, causing pain. Providence, no providence is just wrong, right? So let's see how the Rambam deals with that. He says, number one, it is set down that, and also the, where the Malach tells Bilam when he was smacking his donkey, why are you hitting your donkey? What did the donkey do wrong, right? So in other words, you can see clearly that God has concern for the pain that the human is causing the animal. It is set down with the view to perfecting us, so that we should not acquire moral habits of cruelty, and should not inflict pain gratuitously without any utility, but that we should intend to be kind and merciful, even with a chance animal individual, except in case of need, right? If we need to eat, right? For we must not kill out of cruelty or for sport, right? It does not follow for me, right? So no, the Rambam seems to be falling on the side over here that we shouldn't do it for both reasons. Number one, because we shouldn't be cruel. It makes us mean people if we kill things or hurt things, and also because we shouldn't cause pain and suffering unless it's necessary, right? Unless if we have to eat food and there's nothing to eat, and you have an animal, you're allowed to slaughter it in as painless a way as possible. And we'll see further. Rambam will discuss the issues of pain to animals later when he talks about Tamei HaMitzvot and Shrita and other things. So it does not follow for me that by virtue of this opinion, one may pose to me the following question, namely, why does he watch over the human individuals and does not watch in the same way over the individuals belonging to other species of animals? So you might ask the next question. If it's true that God has providence, this kind of providence only for human beings, but not over animals, why? Why doesn't he watch over animals too, right? It's obviously not an issue of capability. God is capable, obviously, of doing whatever he wants. So what's the point, right? Is it because we're greater? Is it because humans are better? Like, what is it? What is it that makes this happen, right? He cares about the animal suffering. We just said that. So what's the deal? So he says, well, for he who propounds this question ought to ask himself, because if you're going to ask that question, then ask the next question. Why did he give intellect to man and not the other species of animals, right? Why do we have the consciousness? Even if you assume, the Rambam wouldn't have known this then, but even if you assume that some animals, the more we learn about them, whales and dolphins, for example, and elephants and animals that have the ability to make certain thinking certain things and so on. But there's no question that there's a whole different ball game when you come to human beings, right? Right. And our intelligence, right? So why did human beings get this intelligence, not the other animals? So you're asking me why God has providence for us and not them. Well, ask the better question. Why do we have the kind of brain that we have and not them? So the answer to this last question is, right? Remember, before the days of and there's no evolutionary scientists to answer Rambam's question, right? So Rambam will say he willed it so, because that's how God wanted it to be. Or his wisdom has required this to be so, or nature has required this to be so. So in other words, Rambam himself is granting that the possibility that God wanted it, or God set up nature in such a way that the rules of nature were such that a human being would develop a brain, right? He didn't have the language of evolution to describe it, but he grants us that this scientific possibility that humans have it for some scientific reason. But regardless, in the end, you're going to be stuck with saying, why? Why do humans have the kind of intellectual capability that we have and not animals? Right? All according to which of the three preceding opinions one adopts, right? Right? So now the self-same answers may be given to the first question. So once you're asking that question, so we might as well answer the first question that way. Why does God have providence over humans and not animals? Because that's the way he wanted it to be. Or that's the way nature has to be, right? Remember, when Rambam says that's the way nature made it, he means, right, the rules of nature with which God established the world, right, brought about a situation in which X had to be the natural result, right? Now, so here we have the Rambam laid out the first step of his understanding of the issue of theodicy, the first step, and the first step of how it is that God, who has providence, right? And the Rambam said he agrees with Aristotle that the providence on all of the spheres above this that we see in the heavens, above the sphere of the moon, have 100% providence. Beneath the sphere of the moon, there's providence over everything, all the laws of nature, how nature works, but not over every single individual animal, right? The only individual providence that God has is to human beings, and that is through their intellect. And through our intellect, we gain access, right? Through our intellect and becoming closer and closer to God with our intellect, right? That's how we live out and exercise and feel and experience the providence that God has for us. It's in that realm. Grasp my opinion up to its last implications. This is the second paragraph from 474. Think about it and think about its implications, right? And I promise you, he's going to deal with a lot of implications because over the next several chapters. I do not believe, and here he says like this. Remember, I told you, what about, are you telling me that God doesn't know that that spider in Pakistan ate the fly, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. Rambam says, I do not believe that anything is hidden from him may be exalted. I'm not saying that he doesn't know everything that's happening in this world, nor do I attribute to him a lack of power. And I'm not limiting him by saying that there is no providence over every gnat and every fly. But I believe that providence, right, the idea of providence, that the specific idea that God, remember, the providence consists of three things: that God knows, right, and which implies which knows and cares is the same thing, right, about what we do and what is happening, and that by that knowledge he also controls, right, and that therefore the results of those actions are just, right, so that we get either rewarded or punished based on those actions. That, Rambam says, that idea is only relevant to human species individually, right? For providence can only come from an intelligent being, from one who is in intellect perfect with the supreme perfection, that which there is no higher, right? That's where providence comes from. Providence can only come from a God, right? That's the only place that providence, who could know everything and understand it and truly be just. Only God can do that, right? None of us, no matter how smart we are, can do that. And there are plenty of people that tried to design utopias, right? But none of them succeeded, right? Because the human being, we can be really smart, but only God can truly create a universe, right? So accordingly, everyone with whom something of this overflow is united, anyone that has access to that intellect, right, will be reached by providence to the extent to which he is reached by the intellect. So the more we make ourselves attached to God in that way, and the more we attach to God in my Maimonidean sense, which is intellectually use our rational capacity to think about what we're doing, to think about what's right and what's wrong, and to think about living in the way God wants us to live. And we live our lives based on that rational thought, as opposed to basing our decisions on our imaginatory faculty, which will lead us to do the kinds of things that animals do, right? To that extent, we are being reached by providence, right? And that is how God's providence is dealing with us. And to that extent, we won't decide to go on a ship when there's a hurricane predicted, right? So that our ship is the one that gets knocked out over in a hurricane, right? To that extent, We will, and the Rambam was laying that down because that's the beginnings of the understanding of how that attachment to God brings us farther away from punishment and closer to reward. It's not going to answer all the questions, but it's going to start getting us closer and closer in that direction to realize that when we live our lives based on that rational capacity, based on that godliness that's within us, and I know that's a Kabbalistic sounding concept, but it comes, I'm just rephrasing Rambam's words in such a way, right? That more and more our lives become a life of reward as opposed to a life of punishment. This is the opinion that, to my mind, corresponds to the intelligible and to the texts of the law. So, number one, the intelligible, right? In other words, it seems true philosophically. And number two, the text of the Torah. As for the three preceding opinions, remember, Rambam listed 5 opinions and then his own, right? And I pointed out to you that the Rambam views his own as an explication of the Torah's opinion, right? And just he viewed it as a way to reconcile Aristotle's with theirs. So when he says the 3 preceding opinions, he's referring to Aristotle's, right? The Asherites and the Mutazilites, right? Epicurus he threw in the garbage can. Another understanding of the 3 opinions is that he's referring to the Epicurus, the Asherites, and the Mutazilites, because Aristotle he's kind of holding on to, right? But either way, the 3 preceding opinions refer to those, but he didn't say the 4 preceding opinions because he's not rejecting what he mentioned was the Torah opinion. He's explaining the Torah opinion, and he views his opinion as the explanation of the Torah's opinion, right? So when he says, he calls it the 3 preceding opinions, they are excessive or fall short. Those that are excessive lead to absolute confusion and to contesting the intelligible and to opposing what is perceived by their sentence, whereas the others that greatly fall short entail most vicious beliefs concerning God. In other words, they all philosophically fall apart, scientifically fall apart, logically fall apart, as well as the ruin of order in human existence and the obliteration of all good qualities of man, both the moral and irrational. And he explained with each one, and we reviewed them in the beginning of tonight's class. I am referring to the opinion of those who abolish providence with respect to human individuals. Those that say that there is no providence, those that say there's pure providence over every last detail, all of those things just fall apart, putting the latter on par with individual species of other animals. And that again is Aristotle's opinion, putting human beings in the same category of animals. So here we have, the Rambam has just introduced to us his understanding of how providence works, what the mechanism of providence is, and why the special relationship between human beings and God is the relationship of providence, which the Torah discusses, and that only exists between humans and God, not with any other creatures and God. Now that we laid that down, we're ready to hit the chapter 18, but we're out of time, which this is all I really planned on doing tonight anyway. But this is I'm telling you, we're in for a really, really good ride. These next few chapters are some of the really most powerful, some of the most important thoughts of Rambam on some of the most difficult issues, difficult philosophical and Torah issues. So it's good stuff. Anyway, any comments on what we've studied so far tonight? You all have what to think about now. It's when you're reading the and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we talk about judgment and justice and things like that, you'll start thinking about them in Maimonidean terms and see if it works for you. See if it works. And I pay careful heed to those parts of the Machzor that are written by Chazal, and those parts of the Machzor that are quotes of Tanakh, versus those parts of the Machzor that are much later insertions by later poets. Okay, so pay careful heed to that, because and not to belittle the later poets and the other things, because they're important streams of thought within Judaism, but they're not always Maimonidean. So if you don't know, if you have a Machzor with little things, they'll usually tell you on the bottom who wrote what, if you need guidance, right? but see how this works. See how Maimonides' idea of providence works. This will be a good challenge for the holiday. If there's no other questions, I'll close up shop. But if there are comments, please let me know.
Yashar Koch.
All right. All right.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Be well. Be well.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.